In a recent interview, Pope Francis made the comment that he hopes that hell is empty. What I'm going to say is not a dogma of faith, but my own personal view. I like to think of hell as empty. I hope that it is. A beautiful sentiment, one that was virtually absent from my upbringing. In fact, we would mock views like that. In today's video, I will share the kinds of things that I heard growing up trad, leaning on two popular trad sources for how we understood the afterlife: St. Leonard of Port Maurice and St. Thomas Aquinas. And I'll add some of my own thoughts too, as an ex-trad. The first thing that I would like to discuss today is the fewness of the saved. There is a sermon preserved by St. Leonard of Port Maurice, and the title of that sermon is "The Little Number of Those Who Are Saved." The entire sermon can be found for free online and is linked in the description down below, but I would like to summarize and quote from that sermon for you to show you the kinds of things that I was taught growing up trad. St. Leonard starts the sermon by outlining his purpose. He has a dual purpose for this sermon. First, to fill you with dread, I will let the theologians and the fathers of the church decide on the matter and declare that the greater number of Christian adults are damned. And secondly, to attempt to defend the goodness of God versus the godless by proving to you that those who are damned by their own malice because they wanted to be damned. First, St. Leonard turns to the theologians and the church fathers, starting with the theologians of his day. St. Leonard says that he looks to, quote, two learned cardinals, Cajetan and Bellarmine. Now, this is a little confusing here because St. Leonard is referring to St. Bellarmine, but he's not referring to St. Cajetan. That is another Cajetan. This Cajetan that we're talking about is Cardinal Thomas Cajetan, who is best known as being the head of the Catholic opposition to Martin Luther's Reformation. But that Cardinal Cajetan is not yet canonized and is not the same as Saint Cajetan. Anyway, St. Leonard says that both cardinals in question agree, but he chooses only to cite Cardinal Cajetan. The most common sentiment which is held is that among Christians, there are more damned souls than predestined souls. St. Leonard goes on to say that the Greek fathers all say what Cardinal Cajetan said, and he cites St. Theodore, St. Basil, St. Ephrem, and St. John Chrysostom, but without quoting directly from them, at least here. He does revisit St. John Chrysostom in a minute, but then St. Leonard moves on to the Latin fathers, who he does supply quotes for. You will hear St. Gregory saying clearly, many attain to faith, but few to the heavenly kingdom. St. Anselm declares, there are few who are saved. St. Augustine states even more clearly, therefore, few are saved in comparison to those who are damned. The most terrifying, however, is St. Jerome. At the end of his life, in the presence of his disciples, he spoke these dreadful words. Out of 100,000 people whose lives have always been bad, you will barely find one who is worthy of indulgence. Then St. Leonard does revisit St. John Chrysostom. One day, St. John Chrysostom, preaching in the cathedral in Constantinople and considering those proportions, could not help but shudder in horror and ask, out of this great number of people, how many do you think will be saved? And not waiting for an answer, he added, among so many thousands of people, we would not find 100 who are saved, and I even doubt for the 100. St. Leonard moves to St. Thomas Aquinas, who was considerably more contemporaneous, more recent than the Latin fathers like St. Augustine. Because eternal beatitude surpasses the natural state, especially since it has been deprived of original grace, it is the little number that are saved. And then St. Leonard moves on to telling us that God is still good because we're really all just damning ourselves. Whoever is damned must impute it to his own malice, and that if the greater number of Christians are damned, it is because they want to be. And I must say, I am convinced that this is simply not the case. I can look to myself and say that I don't want to burn in hell for eternity. I am not a practicing Catholic anymore because I no longer believe in the same tenets that I once did, but I am still honestly searching for the truth, and I don't want to be tortured for eternity just because I wasn't intelligent enough to find the truth. And I don't think that I'm unique here. I know tons of both trad Catholics and secular or just at least non-Catholic people. And I don't think that anyone in either group wants to damn themselves to hell. If after we died, we were presented with an all-good God, and we had a clear understanding that this God was indeed perfect goodness itself, we would all pick to spend eternity with that God, unless we could not choose that anymore. I strongly suspect that all of my secular friends would make this decision if indeed the Catholics were right. My Catholic friends, imagine this scenario. Imagine the Gnostics were right. You die and you ascend into the pleroma to dwell with the monad, and you see the faces of the aeons, or whatever the Gnostics believed. It's kind of confusing. That's not important right now. But imagine that was the case. When you find out after your death that the monad is goodness itself, would you choose to spit in the face of the monad and give yourself over to the demiurge? I assume not. I assume that you would be like, wow, this was unexpected. What a twist. But I want to be on the side of perfect goodness. Unless very few of you would actually want to spend your eternity with pure goodness itself, I suspect that the fewness of the saved is not caused by us choosing damnation for ourselves. St. Leonard of Port Maurice's sermon on the fewness of the saved isn't the only disturbing teaching that I was taught as a kid growing up trad. Another one is about whether or not those in heaven can see those in hell, and whether or not they can or are even capable of pitying those in hell. I turn to the Summa, question 94, the relations of saints towards the damned, article 2, whether the blessed pity the unhappiness of the damned. Thomas writes here that mercy or compassion can be in a person in two ways, in the passions or by choice. He argues that the souls in heaven will not have passions anymore, so they can't feel mercy for those in hell through the passion. They would only be able to feel mercy for the souls in hell by choice. Then, Thomas says that we only ever choose to have compassion when we want someone's suffering to be dispelled. And in hell, there is no hope of the suffering ever being dispelled. Therefore, it is impossible for the souls in heaven to pity the souls in hell. Quote, now, mercy or compassion comes of the reason's choice when a person wishes another's evil to be dispelled. In the future state, referring to how we will be in heaven, it will be impossible for them to be taken away from their unhappiness, now referring to those in hell. And consequently, it will not be possible to pity their suffering, the suffering of the souls in hell, according to right reason. Therefore, the blessed in glory will have no pity on the damned. Then, in the very next article, Article 3, Aquinas says that even though the saints in heaven will not rejoice in the suffering of the damned as such, as suffering qua suffering, the saints will indeed rejoice, quote, by reason namely of something annexed to it. And in this way, the saints will rejoice in the punishment of the wicked by considering therein the order of divine justice and their own deliverance, which will fill them with joy. And thus the divine justice and their own deliverance will be the direct cause of the joy of the blessed, while the punishment of the damned will cause the joy of the blessed indirectly. My Catholic listeners, do you love anyone? Maybe you have a spouse or kids or just anyone that you love. Can you imagine eternity without them? Knowing that they are suffering? Can you imagine being okay with that? Can you imagine rejoicing in the suffering of your child, their pointless suffering? They suffer with no hopes of ever changing their minds, no hopes of repenting or improving themselves in any way, since apparently those things are impossible after the death of the body. If you are okay with this, if you rejoice in this, then I can only imagine that there is something terribly wrong with your brain chemistry. You have to be a psychopath with no empathy at all to truly believe that you will rejoice in the suffering of your children. When I told my family that I no longer believed, they pleaded with me to even just fake it till I make it because they couldn't imagine the afterlife without me. And I think that when they said this, they betrayed that they disagreed with St Thomas Aquinas. They did not say to me, oh well, I'll be perfectly happy in heaven with or without you. My happiness in heaven will not be made less by your absence. They did not say that. But that is exactly what the traditional Catholic teaching on the afterlife states. And that is disgusting. I mean that as honestly as I can. That is disgusting. It is appalling. I am disgusted by the idea of the saints rejoicing in the suffering of the damned. I hope you are too. If I was in heaven and my wife was in hell, and if I was not constantly raging at the gates of heaven, trying to get down into hell to be at least with my wife and try to get us both back to heaven, I would just not be me anymore. I would be a robot, a different version of myself, but I wouldn't be me. Luckily, the Catholic Church never dogmatized the entire Summa, never dogmatized the sermon of St. Leonard of Port Maurice. Of course it didn't. Saints can be and have been wrong on plenty of things. And if I were still a practicing Catholic, I would think that St. Thomas and St. Leonard were wrong here too. Thanks, everyone.